All right, so in this discussion, we'll look at the nervous system. So the nervous system, like we know, this is a system that helps us to maintain homeostasis. It's a system whose function is based on a special type of cells, neurons. We can also call them nerves, if you like. All right, but although the actual name nerve, used in its strict sense, refers to the axons. Remember that neurons have a cell body, dendrites, and axons. Now, a collection of axons is what we call nerves. So these axons can come from the central nervous system and go to the peripheral nervous system and vice versa. So sometimes cell bodies lie outside the central nervous system, that is brain and spinal cord. Then these cell bodies can send their axons into the central nervous system. So those axons collectively, we call them nerves, all right? So it helps to maintain homeostasis together with the endocrine system. Now, the difference between nervous system and endocrine system, number one, is in the way it achieves its function. So we see that endocrine system achieves homeostasis by the use of chemical signals. Those chemical signals, we call them hormones, right? And these hormones, in their strict definition, they are secreted by an organ and then exit or exert their function in a distant organ. Example given, a pituitary gland secreting adrenocorticotropic hormone. That hormone will be transported by blood within the blood vessels and work in the adrenal cortex, which is way down there in the abdomen, whereas the pituitary gland is in the brain, in the skull, if you say so. Whereas nerves will depend on electrical signals, which we call impulses or action potentials. Now, these action potentials are propagated on the surface of the axons. So the surface of the axons conduct electrical impulses to and from adjacent nerve cells or neurons. So the two neurons that are close to each other will not communicate physically, but rather via electrical impulses. Now, even though neurons communicate by electrical impulses, we see that neurons don't have physical connection with each other. Instead, there's a gap in between the neurons. We call that gap as a synapse. So within a synapse, we see that a chemical is produced. Like here. This is a neuron, cell body, dendrites, axons. This is another neuron with its dendrites. Now, there we can see the terminal boutons of the the presynaptic neuron, and this is a postsynaptic neuron. So that space we are seeing there is a synapse. Then that is a membrane of the cell body. So that is a synapse. Now, at the synaptic region, at the synapse there, the electrical impulse is converted into chemical signal. So impulse is traveling on the cell membrane, like that. Then when it reaches here, the electrical signals stimulate the vesicles that are stored within an axon to release neurotransmitters. So it is neurotransmitters that will now stimulate the next cell. And once the next cell is stimulated by neurotransmitters, again, electrical impulses are generated. So you will see that now transmission from one cell to the other involves an interchange from electrical impulse, which will travel on the cell membrane, to chemical signal at the synapse. Then again, this new cell, now a postsynaptic cell, will generate again electrical impulses. So there's always electrical impulse, which is now converted to chemical signal. Then again, electrical impulse is generated. So that's how nerves communicate with each other. So these chemicals in the synapse, we can't call them neurons. No, we can't call them hormones, because hormones have to work at a distant organ, right? So I needed to put that one across earlier on. So what else are we expecting from the nervous system in terms of difference with the endocrine system? So endocrine system, usually the response is slow and sustained over a longer period of time. So hormones, when they are secreted in the body, of course, there are certain chemicals, for example, adrenaline and other issues. Those, of course, produce immediate effect, but most of the hormones in the body, they will take time to adjust homeostasis. So it's over an extended period of time. Whereas the nervous system is responsible for quick adjustments of the human body to changing of the environment, of course, the internal and external environment. So that's a difference. Nervous system is rapid and temporal, whereas endocrine is slow and sustained. Okay. Now let's look at the general function of the nervous system. So there are three in total, generally. So number one is sensory input. So the nervous system has the ability to detect changes both in the internal and external environment. So we call that as sensory input. It can interpret what changes are occurring. Is it change in temperature? Is it change in pressure? Is it change in touch? Such kind of things, excuse me. And then transmit that change to the central nervous system. The central nervous system is brain and spinal cord. So that system is specialized now to process, interpret, and then come up with the necessary adjustment of the human body to that stimuli. So the response of the nervous system will be specific to the stimuli or the change, if you like, that initiated it. So if the stimulus is about temperature, then the body should respond by adjusting temperature itself. If the stimulus is about pressure, pain, and so on, the body should respond to that pain. So you don't find an instance where the stimulus is temperature, and then maybe the body is responding by light or things like that. It has to be specific to the stimulus that initiated the body's response. But we know that to some extent, when temperature exceeds a certain level, it is now transmitted as pain. It's no longer temperature. Same with pressure. It can be interpreted as pain if that pressure is too much. So once the brain integrates, processes, and on, it should come out with a response. Now, this response is motor. So something must give, something must change. So this motor can be towards voluntary action. This motor can be towards involuntary action. For example, blood vessels dilating or a blood vessel constricting. That is involuntary. We don't have control over that. Next is, for example, moving your body away from the source of pain. That is now voluntary. Even though it's a reflex, we don't think about it, the body responds automatically. It's the brain and the spinal cord that has commanded that response that the body is generating. So there are three: sensory, integration, and motor output. Then we can look at divisions of the nervous system. So nervous system, like we were saying, is divided into two broad categories. We have central nervous system, which is labeled pink here, brain, and the spinal cord. Yeah, about 45 centimeters long in adults. That is a spinal cord. Brain, about 2 kgs, 2.5, more or less, kilograms. Then the peripheral nervous system has other subdivisions. So anything that is not brain, that is not spinal cord, is peripheral nervous system. So we'll start with cranial nerves. So they are nerves that supply the face, the neck, and partly the chest region. Some of them go all the way into the abdomen and into the reproductive system, like the vagus nerve, all the way into the abdomen. So these nerves are called cranial nerves. Why? Because they exit. Some are exiting, some are entering the skull. All right. Now the skull, we call it the cranium. So some nerves are, for example, the optic nerve is coming from the eye, going to the brain. So we can't say it is exiting, it's actually entering the brain. Okay. Then we have, for example, accessory nerves. Those are leaving the brain, going to the neck and part of the shoulders. Okay, we have the hypoglossal nerve going to the tongue. So depending on the function, we see that they are either entering or leaving the skull. So there are 12 in total, cranial nerves, but they are restricted or they have connection with the brain. Cranial nerves have connection with the brain, and brain has different parts. So they have nothing to do with the spinal cord. That's why we can't call them spinal nerves. We call them cranial nerves because they have contact with the brain. They have physical contact with the brain, but they are not part of the brain. Then we have 31 pairs of spinal nerves. So these are now nerves originating from the spinal cord. So that's a spinal cord. Then we see these blue nerves leaving and entering the spinal cord. So there are 31 in total. Now they are paired. Same with cranial nerves. So they will be left cranial nerve and right cranial nerve of the same name. Same with the spinal nerves. So now these spinal nerves are named according to the region that they are found in. So there are spinal nerves in the neck region, which is called the cervix. Neck is equivalent to cervix. So we call them cervical spinal nerves. There are nerves in the chest region. This is the thorax. So we call them thoracic spinal nerves. There are nerves in the lumbar region here. So we call them lumbar spinal nerves. Then the nerves in the sacral region, of course, they are paired. So we call them sacral spinal nerves. Then there's one from the coccyx. So they are paired, left and right. It's just one, left and right. Coccygeal nerve. So here in the cervical region, we have about 8. There are 8 in the cervical region. In the thoracic region, there are 12. Lumbar region, 5. Sacral region, 5. And coccygeal region, 1. So if you add them, they should give us 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Now, that is peripheral nervous system. Now, peripheral nervous system also can be divided into 2 divisions. So we have efferent and afferent. So the efferent division is concerned with nerves. These are peripheral spinal nerves that are entering in the spinal cord. So they are transmitting information from the body, from the face, from the eyes, toward the central nervous system. For example, the optic nerve going to the brain. So both the cranial nerves and spinal nerves, there are some that are efferent, some that are afferent. So the afferent ones, sorry, I made the mistake there. So the afferent ones are the ones that are detecting changes in the body and transmit that information to the central nervous system as sensory input. Okay, sorry for that, the student. So I was explaining afferent and efferent. So afferent is nerves, they are peripheral nerves, yes, but they are concerned with transmitting information towards the central nervous system, Then efferent division is concerned with transmission of information away from the central nervous system. So through the same nerves, but this time information is going to the body now to make those adjustments. Now, the efferent division is further divided into two. So we have the autonomic and the somatic one. So when it comes to control now, to command the body to make those adjustments, the brain and the spinal cord performs at two levels. So we have the conscious level as well as the subconscious level. So when we talk about the conscious level, which is a voluntary action, for example, moving your hand away from the source of pain, that is conscious. That is somatic, peripheral nervous system working, because it's controlling body action. These are voluntary muscles, mainly skeletal muscles. Okay, like large groups of muscles we have in the arm, in the hands, in the legs, so on and so forth. That is somatic, to do with voluntary actions, things that we have thought about, we can control. Now, the central nervous system can also control the body under the subconscious mind, things that are occurring in the body, but we are not aware. So this deals with smooth muscles. Muscles like in the digestive system, muscles, the sphincter muscles, those are internal sphincters, which we have no control over. Okay, blood vessels, glands, and their secretion, we don't have control over that. So that is under autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system now is further divided into parasympathetic and sympathetic. Come in. Okay, just close for me. So we're discussing the autonomic nervous system. I was saying this is a subconscious control. It deals with smooth muscles, glands, the skin itself, glands in the skin, hair follicles. We don't decide when the hair follicle stands on our skin. All that is under the autonomic nervous system. Now, this system is divided into two. So the parasympathetic and sympathetic. Now, the sympathetic, I'll start the sympathetic first. So sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system deals with preparation of the body to handle stress. So this is stress part of the autonomic nervous system. So it prepares the body to fight and fly. So in short, it makes us ready to respond to threatening situations, depressing situations, such kind of things. For example, running away, fighting another person, in the moment of an argument, such kind of, you see eyes dilating, you see this person sweating, you see the heart rate will go up, the breathing rate also goes up, pulse rate, all those things go up. You don't think about it. It's just the body being ready to respond adequately, physically and mentally. That is sympathetic. Now, when that threat disappears, the body should go back to its normal state. So it is now the function of the parasympathetic division to bring about such. So parasympathetic division, unlike the sympathetic, deals with restoration of normal physiology. Because you are scared, because you are upset, you have to now calm down. That is parasympathetic restoration. Next is rest. So for us to feel the mood of sleeping is parasympathetic. So body activities will dampen down, reduce it so that you can sleep. Then finally now is sexual activity. So rest, restoration, and sexual activity. So the parasympathetic division has connection to the reproductive system. So you find that, functions like erection, that is a parasympathetic nervous system that controls that process of erection, both males and female. All right, so that is parasympathetic. Now, so there are a few areas in the body where the parasympathetic nervous system activates the body instead of bringing about restoration or rest. That is the digestive system. So in the alimentary canal, the parasympathetic nervous system increases motility. Okay. Then in the reproductive system, it brings about sexual excitement, which is erection, leading to erection. Sympathetic on the other side, on the digestive system, it lowers the activity of the digestive system. Then it comes to reproductive systems. Sympathetic nervous system brings about now sexual climax. Okay, so there's that a bit of opposing function between the parasympathetic and sympathetic division. Now, in the digestive system, there is another system called the enteric nervous system. Now, this is part of peripheral nervous system because these nerves are found outside the central nervous system. So, we have two sets of nerves, okay, found in the digestive system. So, it's a collection of axons. So, one is found in the submucosa. Remember the layers of the digestive system. We have mucosa, submucosa, and muscle layer plus the adventitia or serosa. So in the submucosa, we find a network of nerves. We call it the Meissner's nerve plexus or the submucosa nerve plexus. So it controls glands in the submucosa, controls blood vessels in the mucosa, in the submucosa, how they dilate, how they constrict, so on and so forth. Then we have another one in the muscle layer, another network of nerves in the muscle layer. So we call that the Weber's plexus or the myenteric nerve plexus. Now, what does it do? This one is strictly muscle action. So think of peristalsis, propagation or movement of food or content in the digestive system. It is the Weber's nerve plexus that enables those smooth muscles in the digestive system to push what we have eaten from the stomach into the small intestines, into the large intestine, finally out of the human body as fecal matter. So these two are independent of each other. Meissner's controls the submucosa, absorption, secretion of some granular products, for example, glands found in the small intestine, glands in the stomach, glands in the large intestine. All those glands are being controlled by the Meissner's plexus. When it comes to muscles, it's the Weber's or myenteric nerve plexus. So in summary, this is how the nervous system is broken down. Okay. Now I'll skip this one when we're looking at the... Okay, let's just cover it so that we bury it for now. So we'll start with the brain, then we'll go down to the spinal cord much later on. So brain, we're saying, is located inside the skull, or what can say the cranium, and is protected by the following structures. So we have skin, what you call scalp, coming Meeting your other class as juniors. All right, so we're looking at the layers now that protect the brain. Okay. So, excuse me, just received. All right, so layers that protect the brain, we are looking at the skin. I was saying we call this as a scalp because this is where the hair is also. Hair is growing on the skin. Now, apart from the skin itself, there's another layer, what you call the aponeurosis. Okay, so between the skin and the aponeurosis, there's some connective tissue layer there to attach this to that. Okay, so this aponeurosis is known as Gallea's aponeurosis. Gallea's aponeurosis. G-A-L-E-U-S. Gallea's aponeurosis. Okay, it enables our skin to slide or to move back and forth like that. Because that way the skin is not firmly attached to the bone underneath. And you see that in other animals, you find that the skin can move because of the muscles that are in there. These animals have control over that. So if a fly sits on it, they can shake the skin and the fly can go. But humans, we don't have that ability to move the skin in such an effective manner. Now, after the aponeurosis, we go to the periosteum. Now, periosteum, all bones in the body have what we call periosteum. This is the outer connective tissue covering. So bone is a living tissue, but it is surrounded by another connective tissue. So periosteum serves as a point of entry of blood vessels into and out of the bone. So periosteum brings blood vessels to the bones. So if you remove periosteum here, come. All right, so I was saying the periosteum is an outer covering of bone tissue. So it allows blood vessels to reach the bone. So if you remove periosteum from a bone, then you have essentially killed that bone because you have gotten all the blood vessels that are supposed to go in and out of this bone. So how will metabolism take place? So that is the periosteum there. Now, between the periosteum and the bone itself, there's another layer of connective tissue to attach the periosteum to the bone, right? Then after that, now we go to the cranium itself. So the cranium is called the diploic bone or diploic cranium. So if you observe nicely, you see that in the middle of this bone, it has spaces or cavities. Okay, we haven't covered bone tissue yet, but I can hint on it. So there are two types of bone tissue, actually three types of bone tissue. Okay, so we have compact bone, then we also have spongy bone. Okay, now spongy bone has spaces. So this is spongy bone, then compact bone is solid. So the cranium is made up of three layers of bone. The first, or we can call it the outer, made up of compact bone. The middle part is made up of spongy bone. Then the inner layer is made up of another layer of compact bone. So this way the cranium is hard. It's a very hard and protective bone because of what it contains inside, which is the brain. Now, after the cranium, immediately you go in, there will be a space now. Of course, inside there's another layer of periosteum. So there's periosteum inside, periosteum outside. Periosteum inside, periosteum outside. Now, the space between the periosteum and the meninges, we call it the epidural space. These are meninges, that is periosteum, but there's a space here, the epidural space. Epi means above. This is a dura mater, the toughest meninge that we know. Then that is periosteum. So there's a space there, epidural space. Then followed by the meninges now. And meninges are three: the dura, the arachnoid, and the pia mater, which is shown here more like pink. There's a pink line there. You can see that pinkish. That is the pia mater. Then arachnoid, you can see it here, grayish in color. Then that is the dura. Now, space between the periosteum and the dura meninge is the epidural. The space between the dura mater and the arachnoid mater is the subdural space. So there's epidural between periosteum and dura mater, epidural space. Between the dura mater and the arachnoid mater is subdural space. Okay. Now, between the arachnoid and the pia mater is now the subarachnoid space, which is here. And you can see that there are a lot of blood vessels in the subarachnoid space. Okay, so that is artery, vein, arachnoid, the subarachnoid space. It is the same space where we find cerebrospinal fluid. So CSF flows here in the subdural space, in the subarachnoid space, sorry, subarachnoid space. So there's no subpia space. So between the pia mater and the brain, there's no physical space. It's very small, actually. It's just considered as doesn't exist. So that is the pia mater and the brain. So they are in physical contact there. So there's no space. All right. So that is the brain. You can see that is gray matter. This is white matter. Surface of the brain is gray matter. Okay. So I've essentially finished all these layers that are explained here. So meninges, I've covered that. Now we can look at composition of the brain. When we say brain, what are we talking about? So brain is the mass that we find inside the cranium. That is the brain. It's divided into the following. The cerebrum or the telencephalon. These are the telencephalon. Or we can simply say the encephalon. The encephalons, since there are two. This one. It is labeled here yellowish brown. So that is a encephalon, right? Cerebrum. That's the largest part of the brain, is the cerebrum. And we see that this cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres. You can see that we are looking at the brain from above. So there's this longitudinal fissure here, separating left hemisphere from right hemisphere. Equally the same here, left, right. But collectively, we consider these as the encephalon or the telencephalons. Now, in the middle of the telencephalon, we find the following. We have what we call the diencephalon. So the diencephalon here is labeled blue. This is deep blue or navy blue. That's the diencephalon. Composed of the following structures: the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. So this is the thalamus, the largest part of the diencephalon. See that? Thalamus. More like a snail in shape. Then this is a hypothalamus. That space, that structure here, this blue structure, that's a hypothalamus. Then we have the pituitary gland, the mammillary bodies together with the pituitary gland, mammillary bodies, giving us the epithalamus. This is a pituitary gland. Then that is mammillary body, giving us the epithalamus. Okay. Collectively known as the diencephalon. So it's found in between the hemispheres. Okay, if I can, yeah. So they'll be found deeper here within the longitudinal fissure. Very important structure. So when it comes to conscious function of the brain, we are looking at the telencephalon or the cerebrum here. Most of the conscious activities have to do with the cerebrum, what we call the higher center. Okay. Then diencephalon mainly acts as a relay center, especially the thalamus. Thalamus is like a tower for network, for phone signal. When you're making a phone call, signals from the phone, you go to the nearby tower, and then the tower now sends that signal to the appropriate number that you're trying to reach. So that tower is the thalamus in the brain. It will send signals to the right part of the brain, which will act on that signal. At the same time, information coming from the cerebrum will pass, some of them will pass through the thalamus, and the thalamus will project that information towards the spinal cord, sometimes passes through the cerebellum. So that's why it's called the tower, more like a network tower of the brain. Next part to look up of the brain is the brain stem. It's like a tree. A tree, you have roots, you have a stem, or what you can say the trunk, and then you have branches now. So we call it a brain stem because it connects the spinal cord. Oh, excuse me. Connects the spinal cord, the cerebellum, to the cerebrum. So information coming from the cerebellum, information coming from the spinal cord will pass through the brain stem. That's number one. Number two, if you observe, you see these yellow structures. These are nerves, what we call cranial nerves. I said there are 12 in total. All right. So the first two cranial nerves, cranial nerve number one, cranial nerve number two, that is olfactory and should be, yeah, olfactory and optic nerve, will go to the cerebrum. Of course, so they have communication with the cerebrum. The remainder, which is now cranial nerve number 3 all the way to cranial nerve number 12, either arise or are connected to the brainstem. So you see how important this is. In addition to that, the brainstem has so many vital centers. Okay. So when you're saying you're collecting vital signs, you're simply assessing the functionality of the brainstem. So think of thermoregulation center. They are found in the brainstem. Think of the respiratory center is found in the brainstem. So when the brainstem dies, that person dies instantly. Like in the abattoir there where they kill, cattle. Usually they just shoot it or puncture at the neck there towards the brainstem. They will just hit the cattle at this area and it causes damage to the brainstem. It dies instantly. So the cerebrum or the telencephalon can die, all right? But the person will be living. Will still be breathing. The heart will still be beating. They will still be feeling the temperature. They can still digest food, so on and so forth, because the brainstem is still alive. Okay, but when a person dies, it means the brainstem has stopped to function. So dying itself, or brainstem death, is equals to real death. But when the cerebrum dies, this person can enter just in coma or vegetative state, and they can still live for so many years, even more than a conscious person. So the brainstem has the following divisions: midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. So that's a midbrain, that's a pons, which is shown here. That's a pons. Immediately behind the pons, that's where you find the cerebellum. So there's communication between the pons and the cerebellum. So here the cerebellum was cut off. Then this is medulla oblongata. So it's the last part of the brain and it is connected to the spinal cord. So you can see here the color has changed. So that is spinal cord, medulla oblongata. Now, these parts have different names as well. So the midbrain is known as the mesencephalon, whereas the pons is known as the metencephalon. Then the medulla oblongata is known as the myelencephalon. So myelencephalon, metencephalon, and mesencephalon. Diencephalon, telencephalon. Then finally cerebellum. So cerebellum plus pons. They are collectively known as metencephalon. Metencephalon, right? So cerebellum is a small part of the brain here, hanging below. Now, it is separated from the cerebrum itself because of the function it performs. So cerebellum, is restricted for coordination of muscle tone, movements, posture, such kind of things. Then equilibrium, ability to balance or maintain posture while sitting, standing, walking, running, such kind of things. So we find that it has to be detached from the cerebrum, whose function mainly is now about the conscious part, thinking, tasting food, sight, interpretation of various sensory inputs is a brain. But coordination and posture is cerebellum. Okay. Now, on the surface of the brain, we find the following features. So the brain has elevations and depressions, more like mountains and valleys. So elevations, we call them gyrus if it's single, but if it's plural, like 1, 2, 3, these elevations, we call them gyri. Gyri. Then these depressions now, this one and this one. A single one, we call it a sulcus. If there are two, like here, 1, 2, we call them sulci. Now, a sulcus that is deeper, instead of just being superficial like this one, you see that this one is deeper. We call it a fissure, like the longitudinal fissure. This is the longest and deepest fissure in the brain. Longitudinal fissure. It separates left from right hemisphere. We have the central sulcus here. You can see it. There, it is also shown here. Central sulcus divides the anterior lobe of the brain from the parietal lobe. So this is anterior or frontal lobe, left and right. Then this is parietal lobe, left and right. Occipital lobe, left and right. So that's central sulcus. Then this is parietal occipital sulcus. Parietal occipital sulcus dividing the parietal lobe from the occipital lobe. Okay. Then lobes of the brain, there are 5 in total. Okay, but we can add the 6th one, the 5th one. So there are 4 in total, the major ones, plus a 5th one that is hidden under the brain. So we'll start with the anterior one. This is a frontal lobe. Remember that they are bilateral. So there is left frontal lobe or anterior lobe and right anterior or frontal lobe. So they work together to control various functions of the body. All right. For example, the frontal lobe mainly has motor function as well as logical thinking. Here, this part, the anteriormost part here, mainly is cognitive function, thinking, reasoning, judging, moral issues, all those things controlled by this part. Okay. Then this is a central sulcus, that is parietal lobe. So this part, the first part of the parietal lobe, mainly is for sensation. So all general sensory functions are felt by this part of the brain. Pain, pressure, touch, such kind of things will be felt by this part of the brain. Then occipital lobe is reserved for hearing. So getting this sound that you are hearing, storing and associating different sounds to meaning. For example, go means go, come means come, sit means sit, stand means stand. All that is because of the occipital lobe. Okay, then parietal lobe, so many other overlapping functions, but among them, of course, shared with the parietal and frontal lobe, we have speech. So speech, there's a Broca's area here. Then there's 1X area somewhere here, which now associates speech with meaning. So 1X is here, Broca's is here. So speech, temporal lobe plus other functions. Now, within the temporal lobe, there's a small lobe that is hidden, known as insula. So insula, we can't see it here, but we can see it from the bottom. So that's the insula. This is temporal lobe, this is insula. So it is part of temporal lobe that is folded in and hidden from view. So in total, the major lobes are 4. Then you can add insula, right? Okay. Then I think we've talked about these parts of the brain, the encephalon. We mentioned all these, right? Neurons, we discussed them under nervous tissue, so I'll skip this part. Okay, glial cells, equally we discussed this under nervous tissue, so you can quickly revise in your own free time. So I'll focus on the structure of the brain. How is the brain organized? And obviously we'll end here for today. Right, so this is a brain. We're saying the brain has those parts, right? Now, this time I want us to focus on the cerebrum, the telencephalon, the largest part of the brain. What you're seeing there below is a cerebellum. Temporal lobe, frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe at the back, so we can't see it nicely there. So this is the frontal lobe, that is parietal lobe. This is temporal lobe, occipital at the back. This is the lateral sulcus, separating frontal lobe from temporal lobe, also separating parietal lobe from temporal lobe. Then this is the longitudinal fissure, separating left from right hemisphere of the brain. So quickly now, we see that since the brain is made up of nerves, and these nerves are also surrounded by neuroglial cells, cells that don't have, that cannot conduct electrical impulses. We call them neuroglial cells. Now, we see that neurons have a cell body. At the same time, they also have dendrites and axons, right? So the way these cells are arranged is as follows. In the cerebrum or the telencephalon, the cell bodies are facing outward. So they come to the surface here. And then their axons go deeper into the brain. So that's why the surface of the brain appears grayish, because that's where most of the cell bodies are. So we call that as cortex. So whatever you're seeing brownish there, that is cortex. Then the region where now is yellow, appearing yellow, is full of axons. So these are axons. Now remember that axons have myelin sheath around it. So that's why it appears yellowish there. And this myelin sheath acts as an insulator. So that's why the central part of the brain, or the core of the brain, if I can use that word, is white matter. So this is gray matter because of cell bodies. This is where the cell bodies are. Then these are axons. So we call it white matter. Now, if you observe again, you see that quite inside there will be some small islands of gray. You can see there's some grayish there, gray. There's some reddish there, red. So those are now cell bodies that are found within the brain, inside the brain there, because under normal circumstances, these cell bodies should be on the surface of the brain, but there are some that go in, that are found inside. So we call those as nuclei, or nucleus for single. Plural, we call them nuclei. I'm sure you've heard of words such as basal nuclei or basal ganglia. It's the same thing. We can call them ganglia or nuclei. But since it's a brain, we call them nuclei. So those are islands of cell bodies found within the brain, and they have specific and vital functions. Okay, like to communicate between parts of the brain, such kind of things. Coordination of muscle movement, planning of muscle movement, all that is the nuclei, the basal nuclei found in the brain. So we call them basal nuclei or ganglia because they're found closer to the base of the brain, somewhere there, underneath the brain. Okay, so this is a general arrangement of the brain. Cell bodies are outside, nerve or neuron axons are inside. So we have white, gray matter outside and white matter inside. Now, when it comes to the spinal cord, the arrangement is opposite, where axons now are in the periphery, and then you find that cell bodies are in the center. So it's opposite. In the spinal cord, gray matter is central. Then what is on the surface is white matter. Okay. Okay, I think that's fine. We can now look at spinal cord. So spinal cord, we're saying this serves as a point of communication between brain and the rest of the body. So it originates from the foramen magnum. So at the base of the skull, there at the neck, there's a giant hole or space where the spinal cord passes. So it begins from there. So at the level of the foramen magnum, it should be somewhere here. Above it is medulla oblongata. Below the foramen magnum is spinal cord. And it extends all the way up to the first lumbar bone in adults, and in children it's a second lumbar bone. Okay, that's why you say when you're tapping cerebrospinal fluid, you tap between fourth and fifth. This is fourth, this is fifth. Fourth, fifth. You enter there. So you have no chance whatsoever of damaging the spinal cord. Okay, but if by any chance you forget and then you want to get cerebrospinal fluid here, between lumbar 1 and lumbar 2, chances are that the needle will puncture the spinal cord and you cause paralysis to the cord itself. So the safest is between fourth and fifth, or third and fourth. Somewhere there is fine, because the cord is not reaching there. So in babies, the cord is somewhere at the level of the second lumbar bone. 1, 2, somewhere here. Now, as we grow, the vertebral column is growing. So the cord remains there, but the column expands. So that's why in adult, it remains somewhere here, right? So now we're saying the spinal cord is divided in 2 regions, okay? So these regions are as follows. The first part, or the first region, is the cervicospinal region. It's in the neck. Next region is in the chest region. So we call that the thoracic spinal region. Third is lumbar, because of the lumbar region. So that is the lumbar spinal region. Then finally the sacral one there. Okay. And I've already given the number of spinal nerves coming from each region. So that is 8, 12, 5, 5, 1. 8, 12, 5 in the lumbar, 5 in the sacral, and 1 in the coccyx region. Okay. So even the name of the spinal nerves are given the name from the region of the spinal cord that they are originating from. So if they are nerves that are originating from the cervical region of the spinal cord, we'll call those as the cervical spinal nerves. Nerves coming from the sacral region of the spinal cord, we'll call those as sacrospinal nerves. Okay. Now, the tip end of the spinal cord is known as conus medullaris. Conus medullaris. Okay. So this part tends to narrow. It converges like that. So that's a conus medullaris. Okay. Then, from the conus medullaris, you see a lot of nerves coming out of that. Okay. So this makes the inferior end of the spinal cord look as if it's a tail of the horse. So it's called the phylum terminali. Phylum terminali. It's this part. Phylum terminali. Okay. Then we have the cauda equina. Sorry, yeah. Cauda equina now is this. So I made the mistake on that one. Yeah. Conus medullaris is the tip end of the spinal cord. That's the conus medullaris. Okay. The last part of the spinal cord is conus medullaris. Then what extends after that are spinal nerves. So spinal nerves and spinal cord are not the same. The spinal cord is a giant cord itself with so many nerves in it. This one here. Then we're saying in adults it ends there. In babies it ends here where it's blue, right? Now, the tip end itself, which we're saying the conus medullaris, is a narrow end of the spinal cord. Then what you're seeing here in blue, that is now the phylum terminali. That's a phylum terminali. Then this is a conus medullaris. Okay. Okay. Yeah, gross anatomy. I think this I explained. Saying the surface of the spinal cord is white matter, whereas the core of the spinal cord is gray matter. Okay, so we can end here and proceed later on. Okay. So again, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. Then we can have some discussions about this.